Mai tātou, my name's Dr Shane Reti. I'm the Member of Parliament for Whangarei. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here and speak. I want to acknowledge my colleagues here today as well. It's my privilege to be here and give you a sense of the government's thinking, the government's view on drugs and drug policy. And as well as bringing, as Gilbert said, as well as bringing the government view, I also bring a view as a doc from 20 years, doc in Whangarei out at Pipiwai. So I've seen end to end, like many of you have, and maybe continue to see the consequences of drug use. You heard Tuari speak. It was in the General Assembly. He was speaking at the United Nations at the video there. You heard him mention two things that were important to him: compassion and proportionate. I want to speak to both of those in a moment. I want to add a third thing: innovative. And I want to draw on the work that the Honourable Peter Dunn brought forward this year with the National Drug Policy, because this describes our thinking on what a framework might be around drug policy. Three anchors: compassionate, innovative, and proportionate. Compassionate, I'll give you some key points to compassionate for how we're thinking about what compassionate might look like. And it aligns very much with what you were saying, Ross. We should not be driven by a punitive approach towards drugs, particularly to drug use and possession. Instead, we should adopt a health-centred approach that places personal well-being at its centre. As you commented, the punitive approach on drugs has led to the expenditure of vast sums of money and resources for very little return. Compassionate, absolutely agree. Innovative. Drug use and the kinds of drugs being used, how they are distributed, and who is doing the producing and distributing is changing rapidly and dramatically. Drug law around the world is changing dramatically. New psychoactive substances have proven very difficult to fit into a framework that we can understand, and the internet is increasingly being used to deal and traffic in drugs. So how we think about innovative approaches is very important, the second anchor. And thirdly, which has been a large part of the discussion already, proportionate. Wouldn't disagree. We need to consider our approach to drug use and possession. Our response to drug use and users must be appropriate to the offence and the scale of the harm caused. Criminal convictions carry devastating consequences for the lives of the people they are imposed on, and we need to be certain that our approach is not causing as much or more harm than the drugs themselves. However, that should not mean any lessening of our tolerance for criminal connections that control and manufacture drugs both nationally and internationally, who should continue to be legally accountable for the misery and harm they perpetuate. The challenge, and I think this is really interesting, I'd like to put this on the table for discussion today. The challenge, we need to make sure we bring the public with us. Framing that debate is absolutely critical. If the public gets the impression that a more health-focused approach to drug issues really means we've surrendered to the gangs and the criminal elements, they will not support such moves. Yeah? The public sees the harm that results from drug use, so in designing policy, we need to take careful account of the prevailing mood and people's concerns about the problems they see in their communities. Let me give you a brief wrap on our current thinking. The government does not intend to change the legal status of any drugs currently scheduled under the Misuse of Drugs Act. Now, not changing the legal status of these drugs does not mean that we are bound to a punitive approach to the people who use them. Okay, so I want to say that again. We're not intending to change the legal status of drugs that currently sit under the Misuse of Drugs Act. That does not mean that how we consider the actions we might take under that act, the nature of the punitive approaches we might take, that's up for discussion. A review of drug utensil regulation is underway at present, and that will examine whether criminal penalties are consistent with the approach to drugs. And next year there'll be a review of penalties for drug possession offences. So in summary, I want to leave you with three pieces of thinking. First of all, compassion. We absolutely understand a compassionate approach. Innovation, we need to take into account the new ways that drugs are infusing into our communities. And proportionate. Yeah? Need to also put on the table that we have to have communities with us. If we're going to move from a punitive approach to a health-centred approach, if that's where we're going, we have to also win over the view that this is not a softening of position on drug manufacture and drug distribution, because certainly this side of the house and in our hands, we will not be a part of that, and I don't imagine you will either. So we've got to figure out how we do that, because public perception will win it for us or not. So we've got to win the perception as well, yeah? And the challenge we have is how we do that. That's just one of many challenges we have in this space. So I hope that gives you some sense as to government thinking in this domain. Kia ora mai tātou.